So we're talking about keeping the change. Now, those of you that are Crest alumni, and I see several of you on the screen here, you'll know that we actually really think about change quite a bit in our course, because change is the essence of what leaders are trying to do, really. If you have a vision for a preferred future, well, that means you want to change it from what it is now to this. And that is the key test of leadership, is are you able to bring a whole bunch of people with you to a better future? Do they agree it's a better future? Do they want this better future with you? Are they willing to cooperate? And the statistics, though, on leadership, on change sticking or staying is rather dismal. About 75% of most initiatives fail. Boy, and yet that's the essence of what we're trying to do as leaders, is to help people go to a better place. So if there's any practical piece on leadership that we need to really think about, it's this one. How do you keep the change? It's okay to start a change, but then it reverts back. So Terry has been thinking lots on this, and we're adding to all the curriculum that we do in Crest. We're glad to be able to add this to it. So thank you, Terry, for your part in helping us think on this.
Thank you, Dan. And it's good to be with all of you. As Dan said, this matter of change is something we all think about. We sometimes wrestle with. Every organization, every church, every congregation is at some level working through some kind of journey of moving from what is now to what we hope to be next at some level, at some aspect of ministry. It could be something that we're doing. It could be a technology. It could be culture. And Dan is right. The Center for Creative Leadership does a lot of work with the surveying leaders. They recently did a survey of 1,200 employees across many organizational levels, and they asked them the basic question, do changes frequently occur in your organization? 80% said yes. There's always changes that are happening. 20% said no, I'm not sure what's going on in those 20%. They then asked the question, does your organization have a history of skillfully navigating change? And with that question, 34% said relatively yes. 66% on that question said, no, we don't have a good track record on change. When they were asked to rate themselves on what are determined to be the 4 of the most important change outcomes, which are we achieved our desired outcome, we were able to do so relatively on schedule, thirdly, our change was sustained, and fourthly, it helped develop new change capability. Close to 65% said that we had an organizational change failure rate. So there's where that 70% comes in. And the tragedy is we're spending time and money on change efforts in many organizations, and that money is really wasted. And we want to help with a deep dive we've developed, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, entitled Keep the Change. It's something that is designed relatively, priced very low, in a very good way, but the best way to use it would be to sit around with your team and think about change you're presently in, or a change you're anticipating, and think about how do we keep the change. So what I want to do today in this webinar is it's a complementary piece, and we provide this to you in the webinar as well by way of a resource, but it's the parable of the fence post. As pastors, managers, team leaders, we know that we rarely leave things as they are. This speaks to the reality of what we call the white fence post. Some people think if you have a white fence post and you paint it white, it will always be white. Well, I think most of us, a moment's reflection reveals the flaw in that thinking. A white post will not remain a white post, because over time, the thing that was once new becomes gray, and it cracks and peels, and the white post requires refreshing and renewal to be a white post. This reality surfaces the never-ending challenge of renewal and reform. And I think we all understand instinctively that effective leadership is the process of tending to those things that must be refreshed and renewed and renovated or re-engineered. So I use this analogy or the parable of the fence post And we're going to just touch on, and we'll do three of them and then do the next three. We'll do three and then stop and just talk a little bit about our own experience, perhaps, with this change wisdom. And so the first three important maxims are simply short statements that I think are based on long experience. So the first one is wise change leaders sell the problem, not just the solution. So I think as wise change leaders, we know the first responsibility of leadership is to define current reality. So this is the task of waking people up before moving people out. The selling of the problem is how we create urgency for a solution. When we begin with a solution or a vision and fail to sell a problem, often people look at us with a puzzled look and ask, why is this solution needed? So you help people see with brutal honesty, perhaps the condition of the fence post. You take them out and you show them, look at what our fence post looks like, and it doesn't look very good. And if we don't tend to this, we're going to have more serious problems. And this is just at the level of a fence post. So part of leadership and change is sometimes waking people up to a greater sense of urgency that there is a coming problem, there's an issue, there's a coming challenge, and maybe we don't see it as clearly now as we wish people would, but we have to sell the problem and not just a solution. So sometimes we come and we have a grand solution. We want to install a great change, and people do look at us sometimes puzzled because they don't understand the why. So sell the problem, not just the solution. The second idea is face the loss, not just the gain. So every change journey begins with an ending or some form of endings. And loss is inherent in every change journey. And wise change leaders help people to face the fact that the taking hold of what's ahead means the letting go of what we know. You may have people with your fence post who have really fallen in love with the wonderful weathered look of your fence post. In fact, a few years ago, you renamed your church, the Weathered Fence Post Baptist Church. And so you've actually shaped your identity around, your fence post, and you're realizing, no, that's going to be a bad kind of situation with our fence post. So there's no way to gain an exemption from this reality. Change work is always, at some level, some grief work. And it is a wise thing to talk to people about the things that we're letting go of, the endings that are there. We know we've all fallen in love with just the antique look of our fence post, but we feel it's very important that we, for the sake of the investment we've made in this fence, that we tend to it. And that's going to involve the fence post is going to look different than we've grown accustomed to seeing it. And you're going to lose that kind of nostalgia. The wise change leader never loses touch with the deep emotion of such work, and seeks to journey with people in facing the loss of the gray post that some have grown to accept and love, and maybe even love. So this is one of the things we discover in change leadership that is a strange thing, is the things that people shape their structure of meaning around. And often it is the way that things have slowly and progressively been shaped over time, and we've grown familiar with it, and we've grown to sort of love the way it is. And when you have to engage a change, you have to help people face the fact there's going to be a letting go. There's going to be a loss. So the third one, and then we'll take a brief time just to chat together, is shape the vision, not just the plan. And the point of wisdom here is that wise change leaders know that a plan is not a vision. A clear and compelling picture of the why for the change is essential for unlocking motivation for a plan. Of all the mistakes made in leading change, this is one of the most common. Thinking that our plan for change can serve as the vision for the plan. There's a need to shape and share the winning aspiration as a clear picture of the preferred future. show them the picture of a wonderfully renewed fence post. So this is a relatively earthy kind of analogy that we're using, but show them, maybe you allow them to trip over the truth of the fact that your fence and fence posts are really there's some need for some real change here. They're in bad condition. Show them the picture, and then show them the picture of what a new fence post looks like around your property, and say, this is, folks, where we're hopefully going to find a new beginning of a renewed and refreshed fence post. And then you say, and here is the plan. So you don't mistake the plan for the vision. So as you think of your current context, it's a good thing to ask, how are you doing? And we can provide you the text of this so that you can maybe use this as a tool with your team. Are you taking time to sell the problem? Are you helping people face the gains to be made, but also emphasizing there's some losses to be experienced, and that's real? Are you shaping a clear and compelling vision? You're on the path of wisdom if you're saying yes to those questions. If you don't say yes, there's some work to do. So let's pause, and any comments or questions, or maybe personal testimonies. I don't know, we could have a sharing time of change efforts where you look back and you go, we really just went all over the solution, and we never sold the problem to people. Or, we had a great vision, but no plan, or we had a plan, but no clarity as to what really we were seeking to do. So comments, questions?
Well, I'll just jump in, Terry, while people are thinking a minute. One thing that came through to me in your presentation is that people need a good reason to change, because change is uncomfortable for a lot of people. So there's got to be a compelling reason. There's got to be some reason, a good enough reason to go through the inconvenience and for some the stress of changing. And if they don't see a good reason, they'll just say, well, why do that?
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
Yes, Jack.
I'm just wondering, what if you are the weathered fence post? You've been there 22 years and you need to convince people it's time for the weathered fence post to be refreshed. When it's personal, how would this conversation change?
It's John, I think his name, John O'Neill, years ago wrote a book, The Paradox of Success, and he framed this idea, the S-curve idea that many of us have seen, is that we go through this level of starting out and everything is new and fresh, and we grow and grow and grow, and we achieve and we develop, and we get to a point of prime. We get to a place where we feel we're at the top of our game, and then the S-curve kicks in and we begin to sort of feel like we're losing a bit of the sense of who we are. And he says this applies to, we've used this for organizations, but it applies to us as people. And his point is that we as people need to take time to think about our own renewal, our own sense of, and no one else can do that for us, but our own sense of renewal and refreshment. And Jack, we all, as we get our age, we are, just admit we're an older fence post. I mean, there's just no, but there's ways to paint it. There's ways to address it, and that's to keep fresh in our own way. And sometimes when we get to certain points in our lives, and I had this a few years ago, because I'm at retirement age, you realize, okay, I'm going into a different season, but that doesn't mean I do this and I just go down the slide. I need to think about what's my renewal for the next season. So I did my personal exercise of what is this next decade about? And I took time away to really just say, what is my renewal going to look like? And it meant getting honest about some things, that I was going to not do some of the things I did before. I was going to do some fresh things, some new things. Yeah.
Now, that's good for me personally, but you have to sell that to other people. How do you do that without seeming selfish? I have to look after myself. I have to renew myself in a Christian context.
Well, maybe there's
Yeah.
some wisdom in the room here. What about
Yeah.
others? What others have we, how would you answer that one? Fellow webinar people?
Maybe it goes back to selling the problem.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite interesting, that whole idea, because we have traditionally tended to sell the solution.
Yeah.
As opposed to the problem. But I think making people aware of the problem is really where you get the buy-in. So, maybe the piece of, okay, there needs to be change come, which will be good for the organization, and helping people recognize any problem that's there. So selling that.
Yep.
It's I have a comment as well. I'm finding that people are weary of change. Everything's changing from daily now with COVID to the roads are shut because buildings are torn down, that place they love to go. Their communication is changing. Their devices are changing. Everything's updated to the point where now, to your white fence post, they actually sell ripped up jeans. Forget about the new fresh white one. They're just exhausted. And trying to get them to change one more thing is like, there's just a weariness. And how do we refresh the soul and the spirit to bring in that helpful change?
Yeah.
Be my question.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good observation. Excellent.
And that's that discernment and leadership of that very condition, circumstance that's wider than just your context. So it should make us very, very aware, perhaps maybe during this season we're in, to be very careful about any major changes. Sometimes you're pushed to that, but to be aware people are, and this is where resistance comes in, and we tend to really misdefine resistance. I think a lot of times resistance on people is simply a matter, I don't have space on my, I don't have space on my Lego block for your change. I've got 8 little taps on my Lego block. They're all filled up. I'm sorry. I've got stuff in my home, my family, my wider circle, my personal life. I'm being asked by people around me to do this and that and change in this way. And you want me now to engage in a major organizational change. I don't know where I'll find energy. And they're resisting, not because they're bad people. They're resisting because they're just tapped out.
Yeah. So another factor I think that is helpful in thinking about this is you mentioned, is it Samaya? Is that how you say your name? Okay. You mentioned that all these things are changing around us. And here's a big factor about how change feels. When outside forces are coming on you to change you, that feels a whole bunch different than we have a vision for what we want to do.
Right.
So part of the discussion in the midst of all this COVID pressure could be sitting down with your people saying, what do we want to keep? We're being pushed to change all these things, but we're in charge of our lives and our world. What are we going to keep? And that might be a leadership piece that people would be relieved to know, okay, you're not just going to, let everything be thrown out and we have no fence posts that we even recognize. And I think that's a discernment factor as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Good. Any other further comments? We've had no testimonials. We've had no.
Here's Calvin. He's ready.
Opportunity didn't think you'd come to a webinar for confession, but maybe you need to make a confession. But we've all got our own change stories of how we didn't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think responding to Jack there, and how do you sell that when you're making a change and it affects you personally. My go-to verse on that is that one in Hebrews that talks about have confidence your leaders submit to their authority because they keep watch over you, or those must give account. Do this so that their work will be a joy and not a burden. Joy has always been a big barometer, personally. And if we're in a space where we're not doing things with joy anymore, it says, and then it would, because that would be no benefit of you if you're not doing it with joy, and that verse says. And so I think that's a big thing to sell, as we're making changes. But I think in the dynamic of change, that is probably a big thing to throw into the mix too. What's giving us our joy? Certainly there was a joy when the fence post was new and white and shiny and all of that, but it's easy to sort of lose that, and people, really when to come to grips to say, yeah, we like the old stuff, but is our identity in the past, and is our joy all in the past, and what's the joy for the future? And so being able to have that joy barometer in, I think maybe is a helpful part of that.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you. Happy birthday too.
Oh, yeah. One of the things you could do, Jack, is appeal to the classic tactics of rhetoric, logos, ethos, and pathos. I came across this story just this week of a girl who told the story when she was a young little girl that her parents wanted nothing to do with a puppy, and so she was asked, "Well, how did you get it done?" Because she ended up with a puppy. And she said, as I look back on it, I use classic rhetoric. And she said, I applied to logos, I applied to science, I used compelling evidence. And I said, Mom, a puppy will lower your blood pressure in stressful situations. Puppies help children develop greater empathy, higher self-esteem, and participation in social activities. And then he said, I turned and used ethos or ethics. I told them how a puppy would make us good and noble people. 2.7 million animals are put to death every year. We can rescue a dog. And then I used pathos. For this, I needed my little sister. She came in with a stuffed animal that resembled a golden doodle. She gave my mom a face she couldn't resist, looked Mom in the eye, curled her upper lip and said, Mommy, would you get me a golden doodle? And that was how I got my golden doodle. So science, ethos, pathos, maybe that's how we sell a problem. Okay, before we move on, the matter of why is intriguing, and there's also other things that come into this. The most classic story I ever heard, it's a true story of a group of people in a large organization who were pulled into a town hall meeting, and there was going to be a major shift and change in the organization. And there were hundreds of people in the room, and there were board members there, there were leaders there, executive people there, and they were laying out this grand sort of strategy of a change that was going to transform what they were going to do. And one of the people went to the mic and he said, I simply have 9 questions. And the moderator was a little put out by that because he thought, well, that might take a little bit too long, but okay, what are your 9 questions? And the guy said, my 9 questions are these: why, how, and what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me? And those questions are what are in there. Those are the questions in the back of people's minds. They often want to know first why, but then the end point is, how is this going to affect me and us? And the better we answer those questions, the better we're selling the problem, and we're also focusing on solution. So let's look at the 3 others. The 3 other points of some change wisdom. The 4th one is simply get ready. Don't just get going. And I could have placed this earlier, but it's amazing how many change stories I hear where a common theme is change efforts that are engaged in without a great deal of thought as to how to engage the journey well. If you're going to engage a change effort, you take the time to get ready. As a world-class chef once stated, the most important part of a great meal is the planning. The same is true for effective change. The key is in preparation and planning. As with our fence post, the best way to get ready is to ask a few vital questions. The work of refreshing, renewing will proceed at a better pace if the tools, materials, and plan are in hand before you begin to touch the post. So using the parable of the fence post, if we're going to bring about that change, let's get ready for it. Let's just not announce we're going to refresh our fence post and then scramble to say, who's going to do what, where's the brushes, where's the wire brushes, where's the sanding stuff, where's the primer, where's the paint, where are we going to get the paint? That usually throws a change effort into a quagmire. So just get ready. Don't just get going, get ready. The fifth one is create short-term wins. Don't just hope for them. So we talk a lot in the diploma program as well as in the MCL, and I emphasize this every time I teach on change, because change is often anxiety producing for people. It seems that the hill is too high, the cause is too big, and they get overwhelmed by anxiety. They worry, they don't think it's doable. They don't sense they have control of anything related to this big, big effort. So wise change leaders embrace the power of small wins in the pursuit of big change. Change is scary for most of us, and the larger the change journey, the more fear dominates the caravan. Small wins reduce anxiety, they increase doability, they foster control, and give people hope that the longest journey can be taken by single steps. So you let folks know. This week, Bill is going to sand down the posts, and next week, Phil is going to do some priming, and in week 3, Jane is going to have a crew of people, and they're going to begin to paint the posts. But you give people the sense that it's going to begin in some way, and the first small win is going to be someone who's assigned to sand down the posts. So short-term wins, the famous designer Buckminster Fuller was the one who designed or framed this idea of call me trim tab. He said, when I die, put on my tombstone, call me trim tab. And he said, I believe all of the great innovations that I've ever been involved in have been done by little steps, little by incremental steps. And he used the trim tab to illustrate the idea that large ships have these rudders that are huge, very heavy. Takes a lot of energy, a lot of power to turn that huge rudder. So what they devised is a small little rudder on the rudder. It's called a trim tab. And the trim tab could be turned with a lot less energy, a lot less effort. And that little trim tab could be turned. They'd allow the force of the water to hit the trim tab, and that trim tab would actually push that large rudder around. And he believed that the greatest efforts in the world always have the trim tab story inherent in them. But in change, we have to think well about creating short-term wins. Don't just hope for them. When I talk about, a church perhaps is going to engage in working on developing small groups, and they've really not had too many good small groups, and really maybe never had small groups. And the mistake that's made is to say, folks, in 3 years, we want to have 100 small groups. And people are overwhelmed, and their arousal and anxiety goes up. They say, that's not possible. We've never had even 5 small groups. You'd be far wiser at a leadership level to keep that to yourself for a while and say, folks, we want to shape great community and great environments for people to share a meal together, pray for one another, care for one another, take time just learning together. And you create an aspirational picture of what that would look like. And then you say, by Christmas, we're hoping to have 3 small groups, but we're going to start with 1. And then in January, February, you have some of those people, some of those leaders share the story of their early experience of a faith community in a small group. And people say, this is interesting. And you say, we're going to now take a next step. And you've created a short-term win to a long-term big change, but you've done it in a step-by-step fashion. The final one is intriguing because we tend to really wrestle with this, but embrace the resistance. Don't just endure it. As puzzling as it may seem, some folks like the fence post just the way it is. Resistance is present whenever change is proposed and pursued. So we often think, well, we need to convert everyone at the starting line. It actually can't be done. A better posture is to expect, embrace, and then engage the thoughts and emotions of people around resistance with clear vision, good, consistent communication, calm presence, and an empathetic understanding for the emotions that swirl when change is in the air. And yet sometimes there will be people who go, I just cannot accept losing the tattered fence post look of our organization or our church. And I know a church down the road and they have a fence that's falling down, and I'm going to go there because they just love that kind of look. So as you think of your current change challenge or one that's coming, you again ask, how are you doing? Spending time with an effort meticulously getting ready. Are you framing some small wins? Are you seeing resistance as your friend rather than your enemy? Because we learn a lot by resistance, by people's pushback. And so this is the next three. Let's take a bit of time to talk about these ones, maybe your own experience. I always find the small win stories very interesting, but or again, confession.
Well, the
Your
idea
thoughts?
of the short-term wins really does give hope for people who are not sure this is going to work. But when you can point to, well, look, we've already got this done. That's really helpful. For example, in fundraising for a project, when the board comes to the organization or the church or whatever and says, we're endorsing a fundraising goal, and the goal is like $1 million. The average person at Pew just goes, can't do that. But if the board comes and says the goal has to be $1 million, and we as a board have already committed 200,000, there's an instant small win. We're already there. We're already on the way. We got something happening. Okay, maybe this is possible. Our leaders have committed. It's not just up to me. And that brings hope when leaders come with a small win in hand.
Yeah. And sometimes the small win in preparing for maybe some larger change that you sense down the road, the small win may have nothing to do with your large change. It may simply be some effort that gives the people who feel very discouraged a sense of encouragement. A number of years ago, I helped a church in Fort McMurray that had been without a lead pastor for 2 years. I was asked to go in by the district and just sort of help them. The mandate was hopefully find a lead pastor. Very discouraged group of people. They felt that no one really liked them. Not only liked them, but no one liked Fort McMurray. So they also had that sort of, sense that, that dirty place up there. It's actually a beautiful city. And so I went up there, and I knew my time there was going to be probably 6 to 8 months of just helping interim. And when I first got there, I talked to the board, and we said, there's a few things I've heard you talk about that you wanted to just work on. And it was little things, cosmetic. And I said, why don't we just do a few things then? Let's do some cosmetic changes. Let's get some crews in, and we'll redo the sanctuary. I said, what about the flags that are hanging around the auditorium up there on the wall? How long have they been there? And said, oh, they've been there since forever. Do you like them? Because some of them are hanging sort of they're not hanging like they should hang. They're hanging down like this. And they said, well, we've talked about just taking those down and maybe figuring out another way to. Well, why don't we have an effort, and let's paint the auditorium. Let's paint the auditorium floor. Let's redo the stage. You've talked about that. Let's just redo the stage. And over the course of a few weekends, we did that. We painted the foyer. It was amazing how that lifted their sense of just, okay, there's some steps we can take to just make our environment more welcoming. They created a little welcome booth, little welcome table thing they'd never had. And you realize, okay, that's just cosmetic. Well, it actually set the stage for them to say, hey, we can change. So when Doug Doyle finally came and took over, he's been there now for almost 10 years, hard to believe. And that church is it's one of the thriving churches in Fort Mac, and we're very instrumental. When the fires came through in serving as a base for firefighters and first responders, and the church is thriving. They just needed a little bit of a reminder that they could change. And Doug's taken it now to deeper levels of the whole culture of the church. And maybe that would be harder if they didn't have some early on small wins to say, hey, we can adjust, we can change.
It's Doug here. The organization that I'm with, we embrace the resistance pretty much every day for the last 10 years or so. But we have shown steady progress to the point at which the community now is looking is actually embracing us to try to understand. We have a post recovery center. I run a organization called Hope in Strathcona, and we opened a sober living house a couple of years ago, and there was much resistance. It took us almost 10 years to get there, and so our embracing the resistance pretty much head on, but in a way of like you said, the reality is we're not going to win over everyone. That's not our goal.
No.
Our goal is to speak to the resistance, to speak to the not so much the objections raised, but just the myths around what we're doing, to speak to that, and then to show that we can do this, and how it will benefit the community, just us doing what we're doing at our little level. So I really appreciated I've thought about it, but I've never written it down this way. To embrace the resistance actually is what we've been doing. But most days I just feel like we're enduring.
Yeah. And to never forget that at some level, through a spiritual lens, wherever God wants to build something, there's going to be an enemy that battles. And that doesn't mean that people who resist are minions of the enemy. Sometimes they just resist because of this or that reason, but in some way, the enemy is very subtle and crafty in terms of how he uses some of those things to dissuade us and get us off track. And you just need to, face the resistance. Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, was sort of a gruff kind of guy, but he used to say, being a leader is often like being a jackass in a Texas hailstorm. You just need to stand there and take it. So the resistance is there. It's part of the flow. Yep. So, the wise change leaders sell the problem. They face the losses. They shape vision. They get ready with people. They create short-term wins, and they embrace resistance. Sort of a shortened version. Even the fence post project requires some skill and wisdom. So as simple as that project would require similar type of things at a simple level. It gets more complicated at a larger, more complex level. But remember, if it isn't strange, it isn't really change. So that's the final word. It isn't strange. It isn't change.
I think it's very helpful to have a list of like 6 things when you think about change, because most of us will tend to focus on 1 or 2. And we just think, well, that's the part that really resonates with us. And if we don't pay attention to the other 4 that are on this little list that Terry's giving here, well, we can be frustrated. Well, why in the world doesn't my change initiative work? And I'm doing all the vision casting, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And we don't realize that change actually is pretty complex, especially when you're trying to bring change to a group. And you realize that everybody is processing change differently, different rate, different way, different perspectives. And that's where wisdom has to really come in, and empathy, to actually listen to people and this little list is a very helpful way to make sure you're not just myopic and just doing change your way because it makes sense to you. So you just do it that way. And you're ignoring all the people outside of this little channel that happens to be you. So
Yeah.
I think this is a helpful piece, Terry. In fact, Calvin, go ahead.
Just quickly on that, embracing the resistance. A big part of that too, I think it helps to minimize the us them kind of mentality, because if we're resistance and we see it as just them, whereas if we're embracing it, then the resistance is something else. It's outside of us. It's externalizing the resistance rather than making resistance being something within. So I think that's just something that popped in my mind.
Excellent.
Yeah. We have a deep dive that we've developed called Keep the Change, and it'll be on the Crest Academy, I believe today.
Yep.
And going forward. So that is there on the Crest Academy. We've designed this. It's about an hour long in terms of 5 modules. There's an intro module, 5 little brief modules. Then there's a bonus module for your team on the trim tab bonus. We call it just a little story about Buckminster Fuller. So that is there. I want to show you the next slide, which this is the overview of Keep the Change. And as I said, this is a brief deep dive webinar that you can do anytime, anywhere. I'd encourage you to do it with a team. And so the low price of this is going a long way. And I think as well, the gain of the learning is going much further if you do it as a team and get your bearings about what's involved in change. So what we do is we simply say these 4 ingredients take time to count the cost, as well as the return on change. So do a benefit analysis as well. Respect the journey. And it's a segment that talks about the journey is ever predictable, unpredictable, personal, social, emotional, rational, and gradual, and sometimes abrupt. And so respect the journey of what people actually experience and change, and then work the essentials. We provide you the framework that's based on Cotter's work and some others of just characteristics that have come through again and again that really do make up the most effective change journey. And it is not rocket science, but there is some science to it, but also some art. And then there's an element of holding people while you're all holding the fire of change. And this goes to how we hold people and care for people greatly determines how they hold the change. And I think this would go to Calvin's point, is that we need to ever be aware that we're journeying with people who, like us, are rational, but they're emotional. And sometimes they resist and they struggle. And we want to hold them in that and not feel they're somehow, it's us in the change and them out there struggling. We're all struggling. We need to hold people and care for them, but also keep challenging them. This is the essence of living the wisdom. And our hope is that you can, in a better way, keep the change of whatever effort you're engaged in. And would be most beneficial, as I said, with a team around a table. And going through, there are notes, there's a bonus material that's provided for you. And it's there on Crest Academy.
And I want to just underline what Terry said here, that if you're a leader and you're going through a change thing, don't just have all the load on you. If
Right.
you actually help your team understand it, and that might be your working team, and then maybe even the board, if you can help all of them understand that journey that Terry's talking about there, and that they all are able then to have insight to embrace it together, then when some of the resistance or some of the loss is expressed to a board member or to another staff member, they're aware of what is all involved in this, and they can have a better empathetic response. So Terry's particularly designed this deep dive for your team and your board, and for you to just take this and work it with your leadership team will do a lot in the whole way of kind of preparing your whole leadership team for what the journey ahead is going to look like. Most of them have never had training on change management. And so you are able to bring to them some very helpful material. Okay, well, friends, it's been good to be here with you on this call. And so we just want to release any of you that would like to go back to your work and offer this opportunity for ongoing unscripted conversation here with whoever would like to stay on. You're welcome to.